So this workshop is being sponsored by Threshold Care Groups. Threshold Support Circle provides a forum and resources to explore end-of-life issues and after-death care options, including family-directed home funerals and green burial. We are trained home funeral guides and advocates who offer information and direct support to empower families and individuals caring for their own at death. Our public education services include workshops, events, and film series for the local community. Come in.
What's this called again?
Self-care.
Self-care?
You sure you want to be here?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Do I? I need some self-care right now.
Come in.
A little more self-care. Always. Yeah, if you're not sure, you probably should be. Yeah. Stick around. Yeah, I'm burnt out. If you're not sure, you can be toasted. Yeah.
Come in.
Actually, I might sit by the door.
I don't know whose notebook that is. I'm not going to let them save a spot. They might have just forgotten it. We'll put it here. I love you. This is self-care. Anybody wants to attend? We're going to start.
Right, is this one or the pet one? Where's the pet?
How's everybody doing? Almost there. Last dose of inspiration before you go home and put into practice everything you've learned.
That should be done by Tuesday.
Pardon me?
That should be done by Tuesday.
All right. Well, so I already read the information about the sponsor, which is the Threshold Care Groups. So you can read more about them if you want to. So I'm going to go ahead and start. So my name is Merilynne Rush, and I'm really happy to be here with you today talking about taking care of ourselves while taking care of others. This is a topic that I know very, very well because for all my adult life, I've been taking care of others and neglecting my own self-care. I feel like I have a lot to offer to talk about this, but I think we also have a lot to offer each other. So we'll be doing some reflection together. It's not going to be all just me talking. That would be very boring at this time of the afternoon. So feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, offer tidbits. Let's have this be as interactive as possible. And I'm not the expert on this, even though I know a lot about this subject. I have so much to learn still. So hopefully we'll all learn from each other. So first of all, I would like you to do a little self-test. So I'm going to pass these out. And this is also going to serve as kind of a little bit of an outline for the workshop. And then on the flip side, I have references listed for all the references that I'm going to be making, which is also in the order that I'm presenting them. So before you're scrambling to write down a name that I mentioned or a website or whatever, go ahead and look and see if it's there already. And I grouped the references under the name of the slide up in the title section of the slide, so it'll be easy for you to find that way. So take a few minutes and do the little quiz. It's going to be boring for the people watching it, so I guess I'll just read it. How's that? Okay. According to the Dalai Lama, one should pick a spiritual path, any one, and follow it. True or false?
Call it out or write it down?
Write it down. Self-compassion means embracing negative feelings with care and kindness. True or false? You're going to get a chance to go over these at the end and see which ones you got right and which ones you got wrong. Meditating on compassion for all people, including self, activates the part of the brain associated with joy and optimism. True or false? Havening interrupts neural pathways that cause painful symptoms when we get triggered. True or false? Oxytocin, the love hormone, is released when you hug yourself. True or false? Tapping is an emotional freedom technique. One should always put caring for others before caring for oneself. It is more important to support people than to do things for them. Gut microbiota, bacteria, affect emotions. And the last one, cortisol, the stress hormone, at prolonged high levels can affect reproductive, digestive, and immune functions. All right, so hopefully by the end of this time together, you're going to be able to have the correct answer to all of those and all your questions that go along with it. I'm going to pass this around. It's just an opportunity for you to give me your your name and email address if you'd like more information about either my business's Lifespan Doula Association or After Death Home Care, Home Funeral, and Green Burial Education. Okay, so how are you doing? Let's look at this two ways. Let's look at this right now, in this moment. Is your well full, empty, overflowing, digging up rocks? And then in general, like say the past few months, how would you describe yourself? Anybody want to speak? Speak.
Yeah, I would say my well is pretty well up there in general.
In general, you're a full person,
Yeah.
full well person able to have something to give to others.
In general.
Does anybody resonate with this saying down here, you can't pour from an empty cup, take care of yourself first? Or has anybody been in that position in their life ever where it's like, oh my God, that was so true back then, or yeah. Okay. The first 5 decades. Okay, yep, totally resonate with that. I love this quote from Eleanor Brown at eleanorbrown.com. Self-care is so important. When you take time to replenish your spirit, it allows you to serve others from the overflow. You cannot serve from an empty vessel. Same thing. This is just, if you take nothing from this workshop, I'm sure you all know this already. So what happens, you can't really read this, so I'll read it to you. When we don't take care of ourselves and our well is empty and we're trying to help other people, we're uncreative in our approach. And being uncreative leads to falling back on poor habits, right? Because we don't have time, or we don't take the time, or we're not just being creative thinking, how can I look at this differently? And so we're doing same old stuff that gets us into trouble. We're being more negative, we're making poor decisions, we're being ineffective in our attempts to help other people, and then we may even get resentful towards others, towards ourselves. We get stressed and burnt out. What happens is negative emotions spur specific action tendencies. I got this information from Kristen Neff in her book Self-Compassion, which is referenced on the back of your self-test there, who listed these specific feelings. When we feel anger, the negative feeling of anger, what do? We attack others. When we feel fear, we look for an escape. And when we feel shame, we look for a place to hide. So these are some of the specific action tendencies that she mentions. I got a lot of this that I'm going to talk about self-compassion from her book, Self-Compassion. Again, I'll read these to you. So the question is this you? Who identifies with feeling anxious or depressed, run down, can't sleep? These are the signs of being stressed out. Overreacting, reacting too strongly to things, irritable, frequently sick, trouble concentrating, not having any fun, and even when you try to have fun, you can't even have fun. Can't relax. Even if you have a whole day to yourself, you really can't sit there and do the crossword puzzle. You are ineffective even trying to relax. Drinking, smoking, or eating more, and neglecting your responsibilities. So these are the signs, ladies. I'm sure you all know them, ladies and gentlemen.
So even though I said that my well is full, I also relate to all of those. So
sure. Well, it's not that it's an either or, right? We're always somewhere in the spectrum of, we may wake up one morning and feel that our well is very full, and then something happens that triggers us, and suddenly we're getting irritable and we're overeating and whatnot. So it can go. It's very fluid. But if you're feeling a lot of these a lot of the time, that's a big warning sign. So what can we do? So I'm going to focus this talk on these 6 major areas of suggestion. Admitting it is the first step, attending to your spiritual life, self-compassion, mindfulness-based stress reduction, basic guidelines in caring for others that I've learned over the years, and then diet and exercise. Oh no, not again. we all know that we need to do that, but I have a few little tidbits of relatively new information on that for you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Hello, I'm going to give you a handout.
Here, I got one right here.
Oh, okay. So a little bit about my personal story. So like I mentioned, all my life I've been caring for other people, first as a young mother and a midwife and a nurse, and then the last 9 years or so in end-of-life care, home, funeral, and green burial, and now I was doing a lot of companion care. That's how I learned how to be an end-of-life doula. And then now in taking care of my parents. My father, who has dementia, who's 88, and my mother, 89, and my mother, who's 86. I look really happy in this picture. And that's because I have grandchildren. And they're the best antidote to stress. If you can spend time with your grandchildren, my blood pressure goes right down. And in fact, my husband, who's also type A personality even more than I am, the only time I actually see him sitting still is when he's playing with our grandchildren, who are now 4, 6, and 11. But so that's just, I just put this picture in there. I do have a great time sometimes, but, and I know when I need to go be with them, and I go be with them frequently. I just came from California, I was with them, and that really helps me. But I will tell you, I was at a real crisis in my life when I retired from home birth midwifery. I was on call exactly 50% of the time, and that's a really hard lifestyle to live. And not only was it just a hard lifestyle, but I was in literally life and death situations. When you're going to the home to help somebody have a baby, no matter how much prenatal care you've done and everything's set up, you know, to be very low risk and no anticipated problems, there can arise situations where you have to act in the moment and you don't get a chance to call in for assistance. It's you and your apprentice or assistant. And that's just takes a toll on anybody. So when I retired, I had to do a lot of self-care. It was that or probably get really sick. My adrenals were shot, and I saw a homeopath, and I did a lot of work on that. And you know, this happened periodically over the next few years. It wasn't like it was just one thing that I had to learn to do and then fix it and get better and then be less stressed from then on. It kept happening to me periodically. The most recent manifestation is what I thought were hot flashes with menopause, turning out to be really high levels of cortisol, which feels very similar. I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end, but I actually had to do some tests to check and make sure I didn't have a tumor on my adrenal glands because the levels were so high and I was having such discomfort with that. So it became not optional for me anymore to learn how to slow down, how to do self-care, how to do my morning exercise and prayer routine and meditation and even, you know, meditations to go to sleep or to stay asleep at night. So I speak from, that's the experience that I speak from, that it's not optional to do self-care. And, you know, I will reiterate, I am not the expert on all of the techniques, but what I hope to do for you in this short time we have together is just give you a whole lot of tips to do further research. If any one of these things that I present to you, these techniques, resonate with you, I've given you the resources on the back of your self-test to look into it more. And if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, move on to something else. So first thing was admitting it. The second thing is cultivate your spiritual practice. So why? The work we do is just too hard to do without having some kind of grounding and centering. When we can stay grounded, we can be more personally fulfilled and not burn out and not be as stressed out. We're dealing with the big questions here. Why do people die? Why did this person have to die now? how do we go on? What happens after death? How am I going to get through this? This is what we're talking to other people about, but it also affects us when we're around people. It's not our death when we're caring for somebody else who's just experienced a death, but we are still asking these questions of ourselves and how we're going to be there for somebody else. And without being spiritually grounded in some practice, I don't know how anybody can do the work. The Dalai Lama said, it doesn't matter what you pick, just pick one and do it. And I firmly believe that. So what happens when you follow some kind of spiritual practice, whether it's earth-based or some kind of established religion or some kind of meditative practice, you figure out how you fit into the bigger picture. And it helps you have internal peace, develops your intuition, and it helps it so that other people's dramas don't knock you off your feet. It adds a measure of awareness and or perspective to our everyday life so that we can function at a higher level and literally rise above. So it requires discipline to have a spiritual practice, whether you're part of a group of people, of like-minded people, or you're a lone wolf going it alone. Adopt something that fills your soul and gives you hope, and then do it. Just like the Dalai Lama said, pick a practice and do it. The word practice here is so important because what happens is we develop these habits through our spiritual practice, whatever it is, whether it's yoga or meditating. And then when things are going really rough, because it's a habit, we can do it. When things are going really rough is probably not the best time to try to take in new information and learn a new practice. So we have to be centered in our everyday life so that when the ship gets tipped over, we can right it again, right? And just a couple of things that I've observed. People who are not sure and less grounded in their own spiritual practice are more easily threatened by other people's. That's just what I've observed over the years. So when we're helping families, it's really important for us to kind of know what we believe so that we're not getting thrown off or off center by someone coming on really strong about their beliefs, and it doesn't threaten us, right? So what I suggest you do is look for opportunities to actually stretch your limits a little bit. Put yourself in some situations where you're challenged. Maybe go to some church with somebody else or go to a meditation session with somebody who believes differently than you. And that can help really clarify for you what you do believe. And then ask, what am I doing? What are my go-to coping mechanisms when I'm not sure and when I'm feeling adrift? Is that when I lash out at other people? Do I shut down? Do I talk too much, nervously, just over-talking? Do I tell others what to do? And if you're noticing those things in yourself, maybe it's time to step back and look at, okay, how can I get recentered here? And also, there's times when we just need to call for the support of somebody else. Right? Don't be afraid to do that. You don't have to understand everybody, do everything yourself. You don't have to be your own guide all the time. So one really helpful article that I found is called Spiritual Centeredness, How to Be Spiritual Amidst This Chaos by Dr. Stuart Vitkoff. And he talks about characteristics of spiritual people. Spiritual people have a sense of humor. They're involved in their community. They seek to help others. They strive to improve. They listen to their conscience. They try to see the bigger picture, and they're genuinely humble. I want to be that. Who doesn't want to be that? If that's what having a spiritual practice is going to help me do, then I better start working on that. I'm glad Amy just walked into the room because we're going to just talk for just a few minutes amongst ourselves here. You remember the SNL character? I'm verklempt, talk amongst yourselves. That's who this is. Coffee Talk with Linda Richman. Nobody's laughing. I thought that would bring a big laugh. I love SNL, Saturday Night Live. Okay, it's one of my favorites from way back. Okay, so we're going to talk amongst ourselves. So find a pair, just somebody next to you. Like we'll start pairing up from this direction so you know who you're paired with. April, I think you're with the woman behind you over this way. Okay, just kind of pair up like that. And this is from Amy's website, or an article. Hold on. Before you make too much noise, let me introduce this. This is from Amy Cunningham's article that was in the Inspired, in an article. Let's see, I have it written down here.
It's in Tricycle magazine.
Which one?
About Buddhist wisdom?
I better put my glasses on.
Never in a million years would have remembered.
This was the, shoot, I thought I wrote it down. This was,
I have a Credo worksheet.
there. Yeah, it's from your Credo worksheet that you referenced in the article. What's the article? It's listed on the back?
Creating new American Buddhist funerals.
Yes.
Tricycle magazine.
Tricycle, yes, okay. So I really was inspired by that when I read it, and what you have people do in your training workshops is discuss with each other, what do I believe with all my heart? What has my life taught me thus far, and how do my beliefs sustain me? So just take a few minutes to talk with your partner. Now you can make noise. Did everybody get a handout back there? Did you get one?
Amy didn't get one.
Did you get one?
Thank you, dear.
Okay, so at the end we'll share a little bit if we have some extra time. But how did that go?
Great.
Okay. So we're talking about cultivating our own spiritual basis, however we define that. One thing to remember when you're caring for other people is that it's not about us, right? So we're going into someone's home with perhaps a really strong spiritual basis, but then we go in there and we put that aside and we address we see where they're at. And the stronger beliefs people have, the more they will be able to tell you what they want from you, or what they want, help with, or how they're going to do it, whether they're going to create a ritual or have a ceremony or prayers or readings or anything. If they have really strong beliefs and you're worried like, oh, I don't know much about that belief set, don't worry about it. They do. And you can take your cues from them, and you just, reminding them basically like, what do you read when you get together with your group of people, or what gives you strength, or what gives you meaning, or what's meaningful to you? Bring it out, and sure, I'll read it, but you don't have to know what that's going to be going in. They do. So it's setting our own aside when we walk in the door, when we cross their threshold. And having that, I liked the term cultural humility rather than other terms that are out there like sensitivity. Because what that means is that we're really humble. Like, we don't really know anybody else as much as we may think we know characteristics of them and what people with those characteristics might share. We don't really know them, so they could be a Christian, but not that kind of Christian, or whatever. So having that sense of humility that we get from having our own strong basis is super important, and letting them guide us and just being a chameleon for them. And then the importance of ritual, which I hope a lot of you were able to attend or will watch the workshop that was done here this morning on creating ritual, because I heard it was so good, and I fully intend to watch it myself. But my basic guidelines about creating ritual are anybody can do it. Just make sure it has a beginning, middle, and an end. Don't leave people hanging at the end when the ritual's over. Blow out the candle and say, we're coming back to normal here, because that creates a safe space. So you create the safe space to have the ritual, and then you contain it, right? And it can contain whatever you want it to have, but then you end it, and people go back to normal. The worst story I have about that was a very misguided funeral director asking everybody at the end of we all went, after the funeral to the cemetery in procession, and then he asked everybody as we were saying goodbye to the casket, it wasn't going to be a graveside, but it was in the building there, the chapel. Everybody come up and put your hand on the casket. And we did. And then he didn't say anything else. And we're like, now what? When do we get to take our hand up? I don't want to be the first one to say, because that means I don't really love her. It's just really scary and horrible and uncomfortable. And my goodness, I just wanted to break out into hymn and say, we can walk away now, or something, because you gotta end the ceremony or the ritual. So, why do we do rituals? They help us name what's happening, mark a transition, ask for blessing, see things more clearly. Bring people together, help us to focus. Create a memory. And you can always ask the family what they want it to be for. If they're asking you to help them, take your cues from them. So the third recommendation I have for you is to be compassionate toward yourself. I learned everything I know about self-compassion from this book by Kristen Neff, which has exercises in it and everything. My husband read it first. He did all the exercises. He's a real exercisey type person. I just read the stuff and just, soaked it up and thought about it. I'm not good at following exercises, but boy, the words in here and the wisdom of this woman are really profound. And I like this quote: self-compassion does not erase negative feelings, it embraces them with care and kindness. So I don't even recognize most of the time when I'm feeling like I need care and kindness. Anybody else resonate with that? Yes. Like I get way triggered and I'm way down the road of bad things happening before I even realize, yeah, I was triggered there, wasn't I? I could have stepped aside and stepped out and took a break, and instead I ruined the whole party or whatever, right? So that's the first, tip is knowing when we're triggered and we need to treat ourselves with compassion. She identifies that self-compassion has 3 components: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. The self-kindness part is recognizing that we need to be kind to ourselves. The common humanity part is, so the first step is like, yes, this hurts. There. I'll get better. Everybody feels bad sometimes. That's the common humanity part. It's not unusual to feel bad when something like this happens. Whatever. I'm not alone, right? And then the mindfulness part is, help us see clearly with non-judgmental acceptance what's happening, being in the present moment, noticing our pain without exaggerating it, and figuring out ways to treat ourselves with care and compassion and get over it or move through it. It opens our heart and mind, and it transforms a negative into a positive. It makes us more receptive so that we can be more connected and we can be more creative. It gets back to that creativity we talked about at the beginning. When you're triggered and you don't know it, you're gone down that path already. But when you know it and you acknowledge it and you take care of yourself, you can be more creative about the next steps that you choose to help yourself. It's all about neuroplasticity. Has anybody ever studied that or heard of that or familiar with that term? It's amazing, but we can actually train our neurons and our triggers to go in a different direction. It doesn't always have to be bad when we get triggered. So we're going to do something called noting practice here, which is in the book on page 89. So how many of you consider that you incorporate some kind of mindfulness into your spiritual practice, or you consider that to be your spiritual practice? A lot of us, yeah. So let's just do this exercise and then we'll talk about it. So get yourself in a comfortable position, maybe uncross your legs and sort of sit with your hands on your laps or whatever. Take some deep breaths, and we're just going to condense this, so it's not going to be a really long, full practice, but it's just a sampling. So take some nice deep breaths. Close your eyes. Note the sensations that arise in your awareness right now. It could be a thought, a sound, a worry, your list of to-do things. It could be something uncomfortable or troublesome, but it doesn't have to be. And allow your attention to settle on that as you're drawn to it. If you get lost in thought and you forgot what you were doing, just return to your intention to note what rises for you right now in your awareness. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. I mean, you're probably just getting into it and saying, damn, I wish you'd shut up. But what you just did was stop in the middle of a very busy afternoon where your mind's probably on, is my shuttle going to be on time? Am I going to get lost on the way home? And you gave yourself a chance to pay attention to something else or that, or just recognize, oh, I didn't eat enough at lunch, or I really feel peaceful now. Something you didn't know a second before, right? So anybody can do this very simple practice at any time. The trick is to remember to do it, right? So that's just the beginning. So that was just an enticement. We're going to go on. We're going to do a little bit more. Next thing we're going to talk about is Tongling, the practice of Tongling. Pema Chodron is amazing. She's written a book, what Peace in Times of War, what is it? Practicing Peace in Times of War. She's a Buddhist contemplative teacher and nun who lives at Gampo Abbey in Nova Scotia, and she teaches people from all over the world. And Tongling is about giving and receiving. It's a meditation practice for cultivating love and compassion. It's a gentle step-by-step process of opening the heart and embracing rather than rejecting the unwanted and painful aspects of our experiences. A way to overcome fear and develop greater empathy for others. So there's a really excellent Tongling exercise specifically for being with those who are dying in Joan Halifax's book, Being with Dying. Anybody else familiar with that? It's referenced on the back. I use this in my teaching, and we can do it if you want. I'm having a feeling that maybe it might be more frustrating than helpful. I don't know what. It'll take about 10 minutes. What do you feel? Is it going to put you to sleep? Is it valuable to do it right now, or should we move on? Just note it. Keep going. Yeah. Okay. The message here is that you probably already knew this, but doing meditative exercises, visualization, that kind of thing with those who are dying can be so helpful, and also for the family and the caregivers and for us. So get the book if you don't already have it, and we'll move on to some other techniques. So I've grouped this under self-compassion because this is one of the best things that I've learned in the last year. Has anybody else ever heard of havening? It's so cool. It's so easy. Okay, here's how you do it. You can think of a difficult experience or something about which you need some self-care or self-compassion, or not. You can just do it. The first thing you do is tap the top of your head. Breathe. Now stroke your arms, your outer arms, like you're hugging yourself, stroking your arms. Keep breathing. And then stroke the insides of your palms. First one hand, and then the other. Keep breathing. Okay, stop for a sec. How do you feel? Just don't answer that out loud. Just think about it. I have done this when I've been in the grocery store line. It's a little embarrassing sometimes when people see you going like this. I've done it on the airplane. I've done it when I start to get a hot flash, or I have a worrisome thought. This is the best thing I've learned in the last year for self-care, is really given me such an easy tool that's easy to remember, that has such a great effect on me. It might not work for everybody. You can read a lot more about it at havening.org, but I love it. And I was so excited to bring it to you here today. My DO was the one who did it for me first. That's awesome. And you can become a trained havening practitioner, and I don't know what that entails, and there's a lot more to it, but even that's how beautiful it is that even just an introduction to it gives you a tool you can immediately start to use.
It feels like tapping to me, only gentler, just kind of
simpler too.
Quieter and with less thought involved.
Would you say that again?
I said it feels like tapping, but it's gentler and quieter and there's less thought involved. And I have had some extensive tapping training in a faster tapping modality than most people use. And this is quieter than that, but still every bit as effective.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yep, I really love it. Hugging, the answer is yes. Hugging yourself does release oxytocin. I've always known about oxytocin as a midwife because it's, what gets labor going and keeps labor going, and it's what's released when mamas breastfeed their babies and helps them stay seated when life is going on around them to nurse that baby as long as the baby wants to. It's that hormone is just such a wonderful, oxytocin is such a wonderful hormone. But I recently became more aware that I still need it in my life all the time, and that if my husband and I actually hug each other for 20 seconds in the morning and 20 seconds at night, we're getting regular doses of oxytocin and everything else goes better. So you can actually do that for yourself, just hugging yourself, just remembering to do that. And there's so many other things that release oxytocin, and oxytocin has so many wonderful effects. First of all, hugging yourself is just a caring gesture. It reminds you to care for yourself, right? And it can replace all that negative self-talk that we do with something more sympathetic. And it's very validating. Yes, it hurts. Yes, I'm in pain right now. Yes, I'll get through this. I forgot what I was going to say about that. Oh well, anyway. So that's the basic gist of hugging, which is similar to the havening in a way, the stroking. Oxytocin actually is a neurotransmitter in the brain that regulates social interaction, reproduction, breastfeeding, bonding, lowers blood pressure, alleviates fear, reduces stress, and helps us to connect. I listed my source for that on the back of your self-test. And the authors of this article did research on couples who practiced warm touch, and they actually measured their cortisol levels and their blood pressure and other things afterwards, and they actually changed them. So that's pretty significant. I'm a nurse, and I need this sciencey type stuff sometimes to believe it. I believe it. All right, so the next technique that I love is tapping, and I learned how to do this. You're a trained tapping practitioner, did you say?
Yeah, I've had 4 weeks of training.
Do you want to stand up and take the mic for a second and explain it to people? You probably do better than I did. Okay. First, say your name.
My name's Wendy, and I was exposed to Gary Craig's form of tapping, which is kind of the original tapping that's out there that most people learn. The tapping that I learned was from a practitioner in Oklahoma who used to call it faster EFT, and it's a much quicker form of tapping. It's very linked to neuro-linguistic programming, which is all about paying attention to how you hold things in your mind, and the fact that most of the things that are happening in our body or our emotions start in our brain. And so this is a way to use acupressure points in the body and just focusing on the touch to sort of derail what happens when you start having a stress response in your brain before it can start happening in your body. And I've seen some really miraculous things. People have stopped in the middle of allergy attacks, migraines. It's good for clearing things. It's good when you're in traffic. It's an excellent source of a relaxation response. You can say things while you're tapping. I have a little routine that I do on the way to work. I have a peaceful, pleasant, productive shift. Just whatever it is that I want to say. But if you're being stressed by an emotion, or you're angry, or you're upset, you don't even have to say anything or focus. You can just say this and just do it. And when you've done it enough and you're really familiar with it, you can do it mentally and it still has an effect on you. So that you don't have to be in traffic doing this. I personally don't care, because I'm thinking the guy next to me could probably use this too. But but you can do it in your mind, or even just a very gentle touch. You don't have to even tap. You can stroke these areas. And I have found it very effective with patients and pain management, coworkers, It's something very gentle you can do. I found it effective with people with dementia. When you can't have a conversation or a process verbally, emotionally, you can do this for people who are very upset, and it can have a really calming effect. So it's worth checking out.
Thank you so much, Wendy. So what we're talking about is kind of stopping those triggers and reprogramming. So what happens to us when we're traumatized is we get encoded, with certain ways to respond. And what we're doing is we're just changing those neural pathways. That's neuroplasticity right there. So you can stop that allergy attack or that pain response. So I often do this to go to sleep as well. It's just a little hard to reach under your arm and tap under your arm when you're lying on your side. But so we can just try it really briefly and see what you think. So let's try it with a headache, for instance. So you tap. I guess I don't need that anymore. You tap above your eyebrows. You can do both hands or you can do one side.
2 fingers?
And 2 fingers. And you can say, this headache. Then you move to the outside of your eye. Hurts. And you make up whatever you want. I'm just telling you what I would do. Really stressed. Goes down my neck. You can feel it in my back. And then you go above your collarbones. Right about here. Headache. Then under your arm, up right here. And then you can do the top of your head too. And then just stop and observe. Okay, now where are you at? On a scale of 1 to 10, if you were a 9 before, are you at a 7 now? Are you at a 6 now? Is it gone? If it's gone, you don't need to do it anymore. If it's more like, still there, like a 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever, you can do it again, but you can also state your intention for what you want to have happen, right? Is that true? Yeah. So I'm, feeling better, as you're going through the tapping spots.
What does the FT stand for?
Emotional freedom technique. So, yeah, true on your self-test. Tapping is an emotional freedom technique. Yeah. So I'm not an expert on this. Again, somebody who was trained in it taught me how to do it for myself, and that's how I use it. And I'm just sharing this with you as a resource where you can go get more information about it. You can find a teacher. You can, learn the skills online, see if it works for you. The other thing that I was taught to do first was the karate chop, where I actually say, even though I have a headache right now, I deeply and completely love myself. And that's just, what a nice thing to say, right? Instead of, I have this headache again, I'm such a, why did I get into this situation, and what am I, just complaining. It's like, it's there, but I still love myself. And you do that with both hands. There's this receptor here that helps you reprogram turning something negative. It's all about self-compassion. Turning something negative into creative ways to seek another path to stop that whole negative scenario that we all know so well.
I have found that if you tap while you're bitching.
If you tap while you're bitching.
If you tap while you're in that space, it has the same effect. It will actually undo that. Like, you can be so mad and just be unloading. Mm-hmm. Sometimes my son calls me, and when he's really in distress, I start tapping for him, and I'm tapping on myself, and I think I'm tapping for my son. And so I'm tapping the whole time he's talking on the phone, and to have a surrogate effect for him. But it also keeps me from getting plugged into whatever it is that's stressing him most of the time, which is none of my business, But if you're in it, you can talk about being in it and tap on yourself while you're in it. And it works really well in the moment. The more you can turn up the feeling, the more intense the feeling is, the deeper the release is going to be. So if you can get yourself into the habit of using it right in the heat, it will change your life. Yep. Absolutely.
Thank you, I'll pay you later. So I was going to show a video, an introduction to mindfulness-based stress reduction. This is the 4th suggestion. And we didn't quite work it out. We didn't have time to really work out the technology ahead of time to be able to show the video embedded in the PowerPoint, so that's not going to happen. But my favorite website for learning about mindfulness-based stress reduction is PalouseMindfulness.com. I think that should be on your list. Yep. Okay, so what that is a free online 8-week course. I mean, you could do it however fast or slow you want to. You can produce a notebook for yourself with you can print out all the articles and watch all the videos and do all the exercises. They make tons of stuff available to you to read about it on all different levels of like whether you need the science or whether you just need to practice or whatever. It's a great self-guided course. It's not a substitute for attending a course, which is always better. But for people who live in rural areas or can't afford to pay $80 or whatever at their local hospital to take a mindfulness-based stress reduction course, it's a great way to do it. I did both. I took an $80 course at my hospital that was a 4-week series where we did exercises together. And by the way, the doctors in my area are like sending everybody with high blood pressure to this course now. And I also did the Palouse Mindfulness 8-week thing. I actually got through 4 weeks of it, I confess. But it was really great. And the resources and the articles and stuff that are there, it's all based on techniques that were really brought to the mainstream and marketed very well by John Kabat-Zinn. And again, we're talking about understanding ourselves and how to reprogram and give ourselves a break, basically, right? How many of you practice some form of MBSR? And how many of you practice some form of meditation? You don't call it MBSR. Yeah, we talked about that. Okay, cool. I'm sorry I can't show you the video. They explain it a lot better than I do. But it's there's a 7-minute, 9-minute, and a 14-minute version or something right on the introductory page for that technique. Anybody want to add any more about mindfulness-based stress reduction that does it, that knows more about it than I do? I just know it works.
I would just say that.
Here, let me give you the mic.
No, just start wherever you are. It doesn't have to be half an hour. It doesn't have to be 20 minutes. Just take a pause.
Good point. And in fact, 20 minutes is not recommended for beginners. It's too long. Start with 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
And if you like guided meditations, of course, they're online.
Yeah,
Many.
tons. Yep.
He has some good ones.
Yep. So I want to say a little bit about caring for others. How did I group this? Mindfulness-based stress reduction was the 4th technique. Then I guess the 5th one is just some basic things I've learned over the years in caring for others that I want to share with you. That's number 5 of the 6. So entering sacred space. We talked about this already. It's their space. Ask them. Listen. Being with people is family-centric, not doula-centric or home funeral guide-centric or funeral director-centric or anything else. It's all based on them and their needs, and it's empowering them with non-judgmental support. The essence of the doula model of care is to set aside knowing and be with families. And they may do death differently than we would do for ourselves, but it's about them. And it's not our job to tell them what's right. So the stronger we are, the more vulnerable we can be to them and not be shaken by it. We don't have to know exactly what's going on for them, physically or spiritually or culturally. We just have to be able to be present if asked, and to leave if we're not asked. Leaving our shoes at the door, I think, is super important, and I learned this as a midwife. I'm on the way to a birth, and I think I know this woman, and I know what it's going to be like, and I'm building up a scenario, what's going to happen, and all the shit that's going to fly, and I just let go of all that before I walk in her door, because it's going to be something different. And in fact, that's a little ritual you can do, is take your shoes off at the door. It helps you unload all your own garbage and be present for somebody else. Little rituals like that are really helpful. So think about that. What little rituals do you do for yourself? It could be something as easy as how you make your hot drink in the morning. to a talisman that you carry or whatever you want to share?
Just that I listen to actually put a plug in for Sarah Cruz's CD that she produced for our last annual conference, What We Are Here For, and it is the best centering music for me of all. And when I'm going to a family, and I know I'm going to be walking into a space that is completely unknown to me, that centers me more than anything else as I'm driving to their home.
So music. As you're
Yeah,
driving.
the music just centers me.
What's the name of that resource?
It's Sarah Cruz, the president, our new president of NHFA. It's her CD called What We Are Here For. What We Are Here For.
And I'm reminded of a talk that the first talk I ever heard you give, Shar, which is about crossing over the threshold.
Yes.
You remember?
Yeah.
And what you talked about was that funeral directors don't often cross over into somebody else's threshold. They ask the families to come into their space and cross their threshold, which they own.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're going into someone else's house, we're entering their space. And that's a huge threshold to cross. That makes us completely vulnerable, and that willingness to serve. And we can't do that if our well's empty, so that's what we're relating it to. But doing those rituals on the way there that help you to be able to do that kind of release so you don't carry your stuff in is really important.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
When I first started, I was young, I didn't have any training whatsoever. I would arrive at the door and imagine that I had a big, like one of those big grey army overcoats, which was my ego, and I would just take that off and it would stand up alone on the doorstep. It was so big. And then I would walk in, do the whole whatever was there, and then I would come back out, put that coat back on, and then go straight off to a party or some incredibly busy social thing. Mm-hmm. But it really worked for me, but I knew I needed that ego to be the celebrant at the funeral. Mm-hmm. So I didn't want to lose it completely, but I just took it off to sit at the kitchen table.
Anybody else want to offer something? Simply opening and closing your hands can be a way to release and make a transition like that. Breathing, taking deep breaths. The Chopra Center has a huge amount on their website about the importance of deep breathing and what it does for you. And hugging yourself and things like that. So a little bit about boundaries. We talked about being chameleons and blending in, but we still need to remain separate and strong. Another huge boundary I have is that you can't be friends with all your clients. I learned that early on in midwifery as well, because you spend an intense amount of intimate time with a family. It feels like you're friends right then, but remember, you're really not. They need to go on in their life figuring out their way to cope without you afterwards. So don't even try to insinuate yourself into that family long term. You're not doing them any favors. Making promises you can't keep is really a big no-no. It's just too muddy to try to transition from being a caregiver to a friend. Yeah.
I have a boundary suggestion.
Wait, hold on.
Albany Medical Center Hospital.
And
I imagine going into each room, but I'm in like a glass bottle, an empty bottle, and so all the light can come out, but I don't get any bounce back. So it's a nice way of protection.
And the other thing is, remember your boundaries. You may be asked to do things that aren't within your scope of practice, and you need to say no. Again, you're not doing anybody any favors to stay longer or do things that are uncomfortable that you shouldn't be doing. And bending your own rules will not really help you or them. Just a word about do-gooders. I heard somebody say something that I thought it resonated with me, and I thought, I really need to look at this. And then afterwards I decided it was a little too harsh. But somebody said to me, people who are do-gooders are really only doing it for themselves, because they're like they have this need to help and they're like building up their own ego, doing good for everybody or whatever. I think that's a little harsh, but there might be elements of that are very true. Those of us who need to be needed or whatever, so that's another thing to pay attention to. Still go out there and do good. And then the other thing about boundaries is just examining your motives, why you're in this profession. You're doing it to boost your own ego or self-worth. Is the way you're doing it really sustainable? And is it clouding your judgment? There's a lot more on professional boundaries in the Doula Business Guide by Patty Brennan. That's also in your resources. So let's talk a little bit about, is it better to support or to do? What's your thoughts on that? When you got to that question, did anybody hesitate over whether that was true or false? So let's think about that for a minute. It's much easier to jump in and do things sometimes than to help somebody else learn to do it, right? When my son was 4, I started cleaning his room because he would never clean it, and he never did learn how to clean it. A lot easier for me to do it in 10 minutes than to stay on top of him and get him to do it over the long run. So now he does. He's 34 and he's great. But it's not. It makes it about you instead of them when you're jumping in and doing it for them. Supporting is actually providing guidance, having a lot of patience, giving education and resources, creating a safe safe space for them to explore different outcomes that are unique to them, and then they own it and they really benefit from it. But it requires us to be disciplined, to step back, to hold our tongue, to sit on our hands, and be very patient. Ultimately, we don't really know what's right for them. So, is it better to support or do? Support. Yeah. Josephine Spire, who spoke at an NHFA conference in 2010, I believe, in Boulder, has done some qualitative research on what makes a good funeral. And what she writes about is that when people are in control and they can make their own choices and do as much of it as possible by themselves, that's what they say is a good funeral for them. So that's what I always try to keep in mind. And it can actually change the course of their grief journey to have that involvement and to make those choices. And when to say no. Unconditional positive regard. Sorry, that's the next one. Unconditional positive regard is non-judgmental support in open-ended ways, listening and drawing people out, not guiding them where you think they should go, but helping them figure it out for themselves, and then learning to be shocked by their answers and hiding it. How many times have you been in that situation where you really thought you knew what was best for someone and you were like setting the stage for them to come to that conclusion, and then they do something completely different and it ends up being the right thing for them that you never would have imagined. And you just have to keep your mouth shut. So you can offer to do research or list options, but ultimately, if you think there's only one right way to do it, this isn't the profession for you. And if you really can't abide what somebody else is choosing, refer them to somebody else. Yes?
I generally agree.
Let me give you the microphone, Heidi.
I generally agree with what you're saying, but I also think with this, you have to be open for the people that actually need you to jump in and do something. So I guess what I'm saying is that just like everything, there's a balance. And I think it's the art of knowing when to support and when to do. Because the 85-year-old husband who wants to have a home funeral might not be able to, he may need somebody to do it for him. And so I think one has to be open and receptive to the supporting and doing, and not just making a blanket statement of just supporting. Because we just have to be open and use our judgment.
I agree with you, and I wonder if you want to just say a little bit more about how you might make those decisions about when to jump in and do.
Well, one of the things that I do with my families is when we're sitting down and having a conversation, is I ask them, first and foremost, would you like me at any point to step in and to either do something for you or to give you a perspective of what I feel might be best in the situation. So I ask permission first. And that sets the stage for really seeing where they are. I always give them an out and say something like, I listen to what they want to do and how they want to do it. And I also remind them that at any time and any point, if they feel that they can't do something, that it's okay. And to reaffirm that you don't have to be a rock star family member and do it yourself. And we are there to support them, but we're also there to do it if they need the help. So many of the families that I have are elderly and want a home funeral, but they don't want to do it. So they call me in to do it for them, but they're standing right there. So I think you just have to use your judgment.
Thank you so much, Heidi.
Can I speak to consequences? So I think the other thing to bear in mind is that if you're sitting there and something is being discussed, you're discussing it, and they choose something, but you know the consequence of that is something, it's just a given that it's going to play itself out like that. Whether you feel you have an obligation to offer that piece of information about what the consequence of that might be, and then let them make their own mind up.
Can you give an example?
So, for example, at a ceremony, so it's a sudden death. You've got 300 people there. It's a young teenager. Everybody's in shock. The parents have been in sort of reclusive at home, dealing with everything, and they say, and we're gonna arrive first, and we want to greet everybody because we haven't seen anybody for a week. And I say, yep, that's fair enough. But I say, can I just tell you what the options are around that? You could come and you could be there early and greet everybody, but you will be smothered. You will be like in white water. They will drown you with their distress. But you can have that if you want. Or, well, it's their right, it's their loss, it's their journey. I say, or there is another option that sometimes people take where everybody else arrives for the funeral, and then I would come out and meet you and just escort you in, and you could sit in the front row, so you don't have to deal with anybody else first. You can stay in your own feelings, because on the day of the funeral it's very different to all the other days in between the death and that day. It's because you're letting go of the body. And so you can, and then after the ceremony, when everything has played itself out and you're further along in that journey, if the ceremony does its magic, then you can greet everybody and be with everybody. And they say, and then they respond to that. But you can see they can feel in their body the difference between those things.
Thank you, Zenith. So in a way, you're helping them take care of themselves.
Yeah, but you can see the consequence of that. You only have to watch one family be sucked into that vortex of distress, and you feel for them.
Yeah. All right, just a little bit about saying no. We all have our limits. We all have buttons that get pushed, and we can't be there for all families, so it doesn't do anybody any favors to get in over your head. Know who your backup is and when to call for help. This is good self-care, and this is a sign of wisdom.